The silver ships appeared over Earth on a Tuesday morning, hanging in the sky like metal clouds. They made no sound and cast no shadows. People around the world stopped what they were doing and stared upward, phones in hand, recording the moment that would change everything. Ambassador Kethvar stood on the bridge of his vessel, watching the blue planet turn slowly below. His tall, thin frame swayed gently as he moved, his large eyes studying the data streams flowing across his screens. The Zilithians had been watching Earth for 3 months now, and what they saw made them confident about first contact. "Look at them," Kethvar said to his science officer, Vorthek. "They gather in groups, share resources, and help each other. Even their young participate in cooperative activities." On the screens, they watched humans in cities walking to work, children playing in parks, and families sharing meals. The aliens saw shopping centers where humans exchanged goods peacefully, hospitals where they cared for the sick, and schools where they taught their young. Everything looked calm and organized. "Their cities have no defensive walls," Vorthek noted, pointing to aerial views of Los Angeles and New York. "No weapons platforms, no guard towers. They must have achieved perfect internal peace." The Zilithians had evolved from herd animals on their homeworld. For thousands of years, they solved conflicts through elaborate displays and negotiations. The idea of actual violence was foreign to them. When they observed human sports like football and boxing, they saw complex mating rituals, not combat training. "Notice how they engage in these physical displays," Kethvar observed, watching a football game. "The participants wear protective coverings and follow strict rules. The observers cheer and show excitement. Clearly, this is how they establish social hierarchy without causing actual harm." Down on Earth, Marine Sergeant Jake Martinez was finishing his morning run at Camp Pendleton in California. The 30-year-old had served 3 tours overseas and was now training new recruits. As he cooled down, he noticed other Marines pointing at the sky. "Sarge, you seeing this?" called out Private First Class Bobby Lee, a 19-year-old from Texas who had joined the Marines 6 months ago. Jake looked up and saw the alien ships hovering motionless in the clear blue sky. His military training kicked in immediately. This was either the most elaborate hoax in history, or humanity had just made contact with aliens. Either way, the world was about to change. "Everyone back to barracks," Jake ordered. "Command's going to want a full briefing, and I guarantee we're about to get very busy." But the aliens weren't interested in military bases. For the next 2 weeks, they observed human society from a distance, focusing on civilian populations. They watched commuters taking trains to work, students attending universities, and families gathering for weekend barbecues. Everything they saw reinforced their belief that humans were a peaceful, cooperative species. The Zilithians had encountered 43 other intelligent species in their travels across the galaxy. Most fell into 2 categories: aggressive predators who fought constantly but couldn't organize effectively, or peaceful herd animals like themselves who avoided conflict entirely. Humans seemed to clearly belong to the second group. "They've built a remarkable civilization," Kethvar reported to the Zilithian High Council via quantum communication. "Large cities with millions of inhabitants living in harmony, complex transportation systems, advanced technology used for commerce and communication, not warfare." The High Council was pleased. A peaceful, technologically advanced species would make an excellent addition to the Zilithian Confederation. They could provide labor and resources in exchange for protection from the galaxy's more dangerous inhabitants. When the aliens finally made official contact, they chose to land in Geneva, Switzerland. The location seemed perfect to them, a city known for peace negotiations and international cooperation. The Swiss government, along with United Nations officials, welcomed the alien delegation with careful optimism. President Lisa Garcia flew to Geneva to represent the United States. The 45-year-old former senator from Colorado had been in office for 2 years, but nothing in her political experience had prepared her for this moment. She brought a small team of advisors, including Dr. Helen Martinez, a xenobiologist from Stanford University. The first meeting took place in the United Nations building. Ambassador Kethvar entered with 3 other Zilithians, their movements graceful and measured. They stood nearly 7 feet tall, with pale blue skin and large, dark eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "Greetings, humans of Earth," Kethvar said through a translation device that converted his musical language into clear English. "We are the Zilithian Confederation. explorers and peacekeepers of this region of space. We have observed your world and are impressed by your civilization. President Garcia stood to respond. Welcome to Earth, Ambassador. We're honored by your visit and eager to learn about your people. The formal pleasantries continued for hours. The Zilithians explained that they represented an alliance of 12 peaceful species who shared technology and resources. They had been traveling among the stars for over 1,000 years, always seeking new friends and allies. We understand that your species values harmony and cooperation, Keithvar said. This aligns perfectly with our own values. We believe humans would make excellent members of our confederation. Dr. Martinez took careful notes, fascinated by every detail of Zilithian culture. When she asked about their history, the aliens explained that they had long ago moved beyond primitive conflicts. Their species settled disputes through economic negotiations and ritual displays that established dominance without causing harm. Violence is wasteful and destructive, Forthek explained. Civilized beings find better ways to resolve disagreements. Meanwhile, back at Camp Pendleton, Jake Martinez and his Marines watched the news coverage with growing unease. Something about the aliens' attitude bothered him, though he couldn't put his finger on what exactly. They keep talking about how peaceful we are, Jake said to Captain Tony Rodriguez, his commanding officer. Have they looked at our history books lately? Captain Rodriguez, a veteran of Iraq and Afghanistan, shared Jake's concerns. Maybe they're only seeing what they want to see, or maybe they're just observing the wrong parts of our society. The captain had been notified that he might be assigned as a military liaison for the alien contact team, but so far the Zilithians had shown no interest in meeting with military personnel. They seemed to view anyone in uniform as purely ceremonial figures. As the first week of formal contact continued, it became clear that the aliens had formed very specific opinions about human nature. They saw humanity as a species that had evolved beyond conflict, just as they had. The Zilithians were so confident in this assessment that they began preparing a proposal that would change everything. They had no idea how wrong they were about humans. And they had no idea that their misunderstanding was about to lead to one of the most shocking revelations in galactic history. 3 weeks after first contact, Ambassador Keithvar requested a formal meeting with Earth's leaders. The location was again Geneva, but this time the atmosphere felt different. The Zilithians had completed their assessment of human society, and they were ready to make their offer. President Garcia returned to Switzerland with a larger delegation this time. She brought Secretary of State Robert Kim, Defense Secretary Patricia Walsh, and several advisors. Captain Tony Rodriguez had finally been assigned as military liaison, though the aliens had specifically requested that he attend in a ceremonial capacity only. Tony found this request strange, but he followed orders. The 38-year-old Marine had served in multiple combat zones and earned his degree in international relations during his off-duty hours. He understood diplomacy, but he also understood military reality in ways that the politicians might not. The meeting began in the same UN conference room as before. This time, however, Keithvar brought a full presentation with holographic displays showing various alien worlds and their civilizations. Humans of Earth, Keithvar began, his musical voice carrying a tone of benevolent authority. We have studied your world carefully. You have built a remarkable civilization based on cooperation and peaceful coexistence. However, we must discuss a serious matter. The holographic display showed star maps with red zones marked throughout the galaxy. Space is not as peaceful as your world, Vorthek explained. There are hostile species out there. Aggressive predators who live for conquest and destruction. Species like the Krextai, who enslave entire worlds, and the Morden, who strip planets of all resources and leave nothing behind. President Garcia felt a chill run down her spine. Are you saying Earth is in danger? Not immediately, Keithvar assured her. You are fortunate to be located in a relatively quiet region of space. But as your technology advances and you begin to venture beyond your solar system, you will eventually encounter these threats. Secretary Walsh leaned forward. What are you suggesting? The Zilithian ambassador straightened to his full height. The Zilithian Confederation offers Earth protection. We will defend your world from hostile aliens in exchange for human participation in our alliance. You would provide labor, resources, and your unique perspectives to our collective civilization. The terms were laid out in detail. Earth would receive advanced technology, medical knowledge, and guaranteed protection from alien threats. In return, humans would work in Zilithian facilities, provide raw materials, and follow Confederation guidelines for development. Think of it as joining a galactic community, Kethavar explained. Your people would be safe, prosperous, and part of something much larger than one small world. Captain Rodriguez listened carefully, but something about the proposal troubled him. The language was polite, but the underlying assumption seemed to be that humans were helpless without alien protection. He had seen this kind of thinking before in international relations, the strong offering to protect the weak in exchange for submission. Dr. Martinez raised her hand. Ambassador, could you tell us more about how the Confederation handles conflicts? What does protection actually involve? Vorthek activated another holographic display showing what looked like space battles, but the images seemed strange to human eyes. The conflicts appeared highly ritualized, with ships moving in formal patterns and combat lasting only minutes before one side withdrew. Civilized warfare follows strict protocols, Vorthek explained. Ships engage at designated distances. Specific weapons are used according to treaty agreements, and conflicts are resolved when one side acknowledges defeat. Casualties are minimal, and civilian populations are never involved. How minimal? Captain Rodriguez asked, speaking for the first time. The aliens looked at him with what might have been surprise. They had clearly forgotten that he was present. In our last major conflict with the Vorthak Rebellion, total casualties across 3 years of fighting numbered fewer than 200 beings, Kethavar said proudly. Compare this to the primitive species we've encountered, where thousands might die in a single chaotic battle. Rodriguez did some quick mental math. 200 casualties across 3 years of interstellar war? The Battle of Gettysburg alone had produced more casualties than that in 3 days. Either these aliens were incredibly efficient at warfare, or they had no concept of what real fighting actually looked like. President Garcia asked for time to consider the proposal. The human delegation retired to a private room to discuss the offer. It's generous, Secretary Kim admitted. Advanced technology, medical breakthroughs, protection from hostile aliens. We'd be foolish not to consider it seriously. But the terms make us junior partners at best, Secretary Walsh pointed out. We provide labor and resources while they provide protection. It sounds like we'd be trading independence for security. Captain Rodriguez had been quietly reviewing the briefing materials. Ma'am, I think there's something else we need to consider. These aliens seem to have a very specific idea about what humans are capable of. They keep talking about our peaceful nature and cooperative society. That's accurate, isn't it? Dr. Martinez asked. Compared to their description of hostile alien species, humans are relatively peaceful. Rodriguez shook his head. Respectfully, Doctor, I don't think they understand what human peace actually looks like. They're seeing our civilian populations and assuming that's all there is to us. But human peace exists because we have the capacity to defend it. The captain pulled up some historical data on his tablet. They mentioned losing 200 casualties in 3 years of warfare. Ma'am, we lost more than that in single battles during World War II, in single hours during some operations. President Garcia felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her. The alien offer was presented as generous protection for a helpless species. But Rodriguez was right. The Zilithians seemed to have completely misunderstood human nature. Over the next several days, the negotiations continued. The aliens were patient but clearly confident that Earth would accept their protection. They shared more stories about their own conflicts and their success in maintaining peace throughout their region of space. The key to civilized conflict resolution is limiting violence to symbolic levels, Kethavar explained during one session. When beings understand that actual destruction serves no purpose, they find better ways to resolve disputes. What about species that don't accept those limitations? Rodriguez asked. Such species are primitive and disorganized, Vorthek replied dismissively. They may cause local damage, but they cannot sustain complex military operations. They burn themselves out through their own aggression. Rodriguez exchanged glances with Secretary Walsh. The aliens seemed to believe that any species capable of large-scale, sustained warfare would be too chaotic to be a real threat. They had never encountered a species that combined human-level organization with human-level capacity for violence. As the week progressed, it became clear that the Zilithians expected Earth to accept their protection offer. They had never encountered a peaceful species that declined their assistance. In their experience, any civilization advanced enough to be worth protecting was also wise, enough to accept help when offered. But Captain Rodriguez was beginning to think that the aliens might not understand what they were actually offering to protect. They saw human cities and human cooperation, but they had no idea about human military history or capability. They were offering to defend a species they thought was helpless, not realizing that humans might be perfectly capable of defending themselves. The stage was being set for a revelation that would shock the Zilithians to their core. They were about to learn that their peaceful human friends had spent thousands of years perfecting the art of warfare. And they were about to discover that human military capability was unlike anything they had ever encountered in their travels across the galaxy. The question was whether this revelation would lead to mutual respect and partnership, or whether it would convince the aliens that humans were too dangerous to be trusted as allies. The cultural exchange program began 2 weeks later. President Garcia had agreed to allow the Zilithians to learn more about human society, while Earth's leaders considered their protection offer. The aliens seemed eager to understand human civilization better, and they requested presentations about human history and culture. Marine Lieutenant Colonel Rick Santos had been assigned to participate in the exchange program. The 42-year-old officer had served for 20 years and held a master's degree in military history. He was chosen specifically because of his ability to explain complex topics in simple terms. The presentation was scheduled for the UN building in New York. The audience included Ambassador Kethvar, 6 other Zilithian officials, and several human diplomats. Santos had prepared what he thought would be a basic overview of human military development, starting with what he considered fundamental concepts. Today I want to talk about something that's very important to human civilization, Santos began, standing before a mixed audience of humans and aliens. The laws of warfare and military ethics. Kethvar tilted his head in confusion. His large eyes blinked slowly as he processed the translation. Laws of warfare? Could you explain this concept? Santos smiled, thinking this would be an easy topic. Of course. These are international agreements that govern how military forces conduct operations, rules about protecting civilians, treating prisoners humanely, and avoiding unnecessary destruction. The Zilithians looked at each other with obvious confusion. Vorthik raised one of his long arms. Why would ceremonial combat require such detailed regulations? It was Santos's turn to look confused. Ceremonial combat? I'm not talking about ceremonies. I'm talking about actual warfare between nations and military forces. The room fell silent. Ambassador Kethavar's expression changed from polite interest to something that looked like concern. Colonel Santos, are you suggesting that humans engage in real violence during conflicts? Santos realized that something was very wrong with this conversation. Ambassador, are you saying your species doesn't have actual military conflicts? We have disputes, certainly, Kethavar replied carefully. But these are resolved through economic pressure, ritual displays of strength, and negotiated settlements. Physical violence is wasteful and primitive. The human diplomats in the room began to understand that a serious miscommunication had occurred. Dr. Martinez leaned forward. Ambassador, when you spoke about your conflicts with the Vorthak Rebellion, you mentioned 200 casualties over 3 years. What exactly did you mean by casualties? Beings who were injured during the ritual combats and died from their wounds, Vorthak explained, usually because they refused medical treatment to maintain their honor. Such deaths are tragic but rare. Santos felt his understanding of the situation shift dramatically. Ambassador, I think we need to clarify something important. When humans talk about military casualties, we're not talking about ritual combat. We're talking about organized violence between large groups of armed people. He activated a holographic display and brought up a historical overview. Let me show you some examples from human history. The first image showed casualty figures from major human conflicts. World War I, 16 million military deaths. World War II, 21 million military deaths. The numbers appeared in stark, simple text against a dark background. The Zilithians stared at the display in shocked silence. Finally, Kethvar spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. These numbers, they cannot be accurate. They're conservative estimates, Santos replied gently. And those are just military casualties. Civilian deaths in some conflicts were even higher. Ambassador Kethavar's legs seemed to give out slightly. and he swayed before steadying himself against the conference table. You're saying that humans have killed millions of their own species in organized fighting? Throughout history, yes, Santos confirmed. But that's exactly why we developed laws of warfare. We learned that without rules and limits, conflicts become unnecessarily destructive. Dr. Martinez was taking careful notes, watching the aliens' reactions with fascination and growing concern. The Zilithians looked like they were processing information that challenged their entire understanding of reality. Marine Staff Sergeant Amy Chen had been standing quietly in the back of the room, but now she stepped forward. The 28-year-old had served in Afghanistan and Iraq, and she could see that the aliens needed a clearer explanation. Ambassador, Chen said respectfully, may I ask how your species typically resolves territorial disputes or resource conflicts? Vorthek answered, still looking shaken. Economic negotiations. Trade agreements. Ritual combat between designated champions. The losing side accepts the outcome and adjusts their behavior accordingly. And if one side refuses to accept the outcome? Chen asked. That has never happened, Kethvar admitted. When the ritual is complete, the matter is settled. No civilized being would continue a dispute after losing the formal contest. Chen nodded slowly. Humans develop differently. When one group wants something that another group has and peaceful negotiation fails, the result is often warfare, large-scale, organized violence involving thousands or millions of people. She activated another section of the display, showing military organization charts. This is why humans developed professional military forces. Armies, navies, air forces, groups of people trained specifically for combat, with chains of command, strategic planning, and specialized equipment. The Zilithians studied the organizational charts with growing horror. They were looking at flowcharts that described the systematic organization of violence on a scale they had never imagined possible. You train people specifically for killing? Vorthek asked, his voice shaking. We train people to protect our societies, Santos corrected gently. But yes, that training includes learning how to kill enemy combatants when necessary. Kethvar was now sitting down, his large frame folded into one of the human-sized chairs. The physical displays we observed, the games with protective gear, these were not mating rituals. Football, boxing? Chen shook her head. Those are sports, but they're also ways for humans to practice controlled aggression. They help us understand combat principles in a safe environment. The colonel brought up images of modern military equipment, tanks, fighter jets, aircraft carriers, artillery pieces. The aliens stared at the weapons with the same expression humans might have when looking at instruments of torture. These machines are designed for destroying other machines and killing enemy soldiers, Santos explained. Modern warfare involves combined arms tactics where different types of military units work together to achieve victory. Victory? Kethvar repeated the word as if it were foreign. Defeating the enemy force, Chen clarified, making them unable or unwilling to continue fighting. Sometimes this means destroying their equipment. Sometimes it means capturing their territory. And sometimes it means killing enough of their soldiers that they surrender. Dr. Martinez had stopped taking notes and was simply watching the aliens process this information. As a xenobiologist, she was witnessing something unprecedented. First contact with a species that had never experienced anything resembling human-scale warfare. Ambassador Kethvar stood up slowly, his movements unsteady. Colonel Santos, Staff Sergeant Chen, are you telling me that human civilization exists alongside organized groups trained for mass violence? Not alongside, Santos replied. Human civilization exists because of organized groups trained to defend it. Our peaceful society is possible because we have the military capability to protect it from those who would destroy it. The revelation was spreading beyond the conference room. Word was already traveling through Zilithian communication networks that humans were not the peaceful species they had appeared to be. The implications were staggering. The aliens were beginning to realize that they had completely misunderstood Earth's inhabitants. The humans they thought were helpless and in need of protection were actually a species that had spent millennia perfecting the art of warfare, and they were about to learn that human military capability was far more sophisticated and deadly than anything they had encountered in their travels across the galaxy. The emergency meeting was called within hours. Ambassador Kethvar had sent urgent communications to the Zilithian High Council, but they found his reports about human military capability so shocking that they demanded proof. The council ordered an immediate demonstration of human ceremonial combat, to verify these disturbing claims. President Garcia approved the demonstration, though she suspected the aliens were about to get more than they bargained for. General Pete Davis, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, was tasked with organizing a training exercise that would show the Zilithians what human military forces actually looked like in action. "Keep it simple," President Garcia instructed. "We don't want to terrify them completely. Just show them enough to make them understand what they're dealing with." The demonstration was scheduled for the Marine Corps Air Ground Combat Center at 29 Palms in California. It would involve a combined arms training exercise, something the Marines did regularly, but which would be completely foreign to alien observers. Ambassador Kethvar arrived with a full delegation of Zilithian military analysts, scientists, and cultural observers. They had spent the previous night reviewing human historical records, and their mood was somber. The cheerful confidence they had displayed during first contact was gone, replaced by nervous uncertainty. Captain Rodriguez met the alien delegation at the observation area overlooking the training ground. The desert landscape stretched for miles in every direction, marked by hills, valleys, and scattered buildings used for military exercises. "Ambassador," Rodriguez said respectfully, "what you're going to see today is a standard training exercise. Our Marines practice these maneuvers regularly to maintain their readiness." "Readiness for what?" Vorthek asked, though his tone suggested he already feared the answer. "For warfare," Rodriguez replied simply. "For defending our nation and our allies from enemies who would harm them." The exercise began with what seemed like silence and emptiness. The aliens saw only empty desert and a few scattered buildings in the distance. Then Rodriguez handed Kethvar a pair of military binoculars. "Watch the ridgeline to the north," Rodriguez suggested. Through the binoculars, Kethvar saw movement. Human figures in camouflaged uniforms were advancing through the terrain, but they moved in ways that seemed impossible. They appeared and disappeared like ghosts, using the landscape itself as cover. The aliens had never seen anything like it. "Those are Marines from 2nd Battalion," Rodriguez explained. "They're conducting reconnaissance and establishing forward positions." Suddenly, the desert erupted in controlled violence. Artillery shells began impacting a target area 2 miles away, sending clouds of dust and debris into the air. The Zilithians flinched at each explosion, but the worst was yet to come. Fighter jets appeared overhead, moving faster than anything in the Zilithian fleet. The F-18 Hornet screamed across the sky and delivered precision strikes on designated targets. The sound alone was overwhelming to the aliens, but the destructive power they witnessed was beyond their comprehension. "Each of those aircraft carries enough firepower to level a city block," General Davis explained as he joined the observation group, "and we have hundreds of them." Marine Gunnery Sergeant Carlos Wright approached with a selection of weapons from different eras of human warfare. He had been chosen for this demonstration because of his extensive knowledge of military history and his ability to explain complex concepts clearly. "Ambassador," Wright said, laying out rifles, machine guns, and other equipment on a table, "these are some of the tools humans have developed for warfare over the past few centuries." He picked up an M1 Garand rifle from World War II. This weapon was standard issue for American forces in the 1940s. It fires a bullet that can kill a human, being at ranges over 500 meters. The alien stared at the weapon as if it were a venomous snake. Wright continued, picking up a modern M4 carbine. "This is what our Marines carry today. It's more accurate, more reliable, and more deadly than anything from the previous generation." "How many humans can operate these weapons?" Kethvar asked in a shaking voice. "Active duty military personnel number about 1.3 million in the United States alone," General Davis replied. "But in a total war scenario, we could arm and train tens of millions of civilians. Most human males and many females have at least basic familiarity with firearms." The demonstration continued with mechanized units moving across the desert floor. Tanks, armored personnel carriers, and support vehicles advanced in coordinated formations. The aliens watched in fascination and horror as the human military machine demonstrated its capability for rapid movement and overwhelming firepower. Dr. Martinez had joined the observation group and was carefully documenting the aliens' reactions. As a scientist, she found their responses fascinating. As a human being, she was beginning to understand just how different the two species really were. "Ambassador," she said gently, "can you help me understand how Zilithian military forces operate? What would a similar demonstration look like for your species? Vorthek seemed to struggle with the question. We have ships that can engage in ritual combat. The crews are trained in formal procedures for conducting disputes, but nothing like this. How many beings serve in your military forces? General Davis asked. Across all 12 species in the Confederation, perhaps 10,000, Kethavar replied. Most conflicts are resolved by economic pressure or diplomatic negotiation. When ritual combat is necessary, it involves small numbers of participants following strict protocols. Captain Rodriguez did some quick calculations. The United States alone had more than 100 times as many active military personnel as the entire Zilithian Confederation. And that was just one country on one planet. The demonstration reached its climax when all elements combined for a coordinated assault on a simulated enemy position. Artillery provided covering fire while aircraft delivered precision strikes. Ground forces advanced under protective fire, using combined arms tactics to overwhelm the imaginary defenders. The Zilithians watched in stunned silence as human military doctrine unfolded before their eyes. What they were seeing wasn't just violence, it was organized, systematic, and devastatingly effective. Every movement had a purpose, every weapon had a role, and every Marine knew exactly what they were supposed to do. This is how humans fight, Wright explained as the exercise concluded. Not as individuals seeking glory, but as coordinated units working toward victory. We call it combined arms warfare, and we've been perfecting it for centuries. Ambassador Kethavar sat down heavily on a bench, his large frame seeming to shrink as he processed what he had witnessed. Your entire civilization is organized around the capacity for this level of violence. Not organized around it, General Davis corrected, but protected by it. Every human city, every school, every hospital exists because people like these Marines are willing and able to defend them. The aliens were beginning to understand that they had encountered something unprecedented in their galactic travels. Humans combined the organizational capabilities of an advanced civilization with the military potential of a warrior species. They weren't chaotic berserkers who burned themselves out through mindless aggression, nor were they peaceful herd animals who avoided conflict entirely. How do you control such forces? Vorthek asked, his voice barely audible. How do you prevent them from turning this violence against your own population? Captain Rodriguez smiled slightly. That's probably the most important question you could ask, Ambassador. And the answer is what makes humans truly dangerous. Not just our ability to wage war, but our ability to choose when not to. The demonstration was over, but the real education was just beginning. The Zilithians were about to learn about military discipline, civilian control of armed forces, and the complex ethical frameworks that governed human warfare. They would discover that human military power existed within systems of law, honor, and moral restraint, and they would have to decide whether this made humans suitable allies or threats too dangerous to be trusted. The Zilithian ships withdrew to the edge of Earth's solar system within 24 hours of the military demonstration. Ambassador Kethavar sent emergency transmissions to the High Council, reporting discoveries that challenged everything the Confederation thought they knew about intelligent species. For 3 days, there was no communication from the aliens. Earth's governments waited nervously, unsure whether first contact was about to become humanity's first interstellar war. Military forces around the world quietly increased their readiness levels, though nobody was sure how effective human weapons would be against alien technology. On the 4th day, Ambassador Kethavar requested a meeting with President Garcia. His tone was completely different from their previous encounters, respectful, cautious, and deeply concerned. The confident benefactor was gone, replaced by a being who had been forced to reconsider fundamental assumptions about the nature of intelligent life. The meeting took place in Washington, D.C. at the White House. President Garcia assembled her full national security team, including General Davis, Secretary Walsh, and Captain Rodriguez. Dr. Martinez was also present, along with Colonel Santos and several other military advisors. Ambassador Kethavar arrived with only 2 companions, a dramatic reduction from his previous entourages. His movements seemed more careful, more deliberate, as if he were navigating dangerous territory. President Garcia, he began, his musical voice carrying none of its previous authority. The Zilithian High Council has reviewed our findings about human civilization. We must withdraw our previous offer of protection. A moment of tense silence filled the room. Secretary Walsh leaned forward. Are you saying the Confederation no longer wishes to establish relations with Earth? Not exactly, Kethavar replied carefully. We are saying that our initial assessment was profoundly incorrect. We approached Earth believing we were making contact with a peaceful species in need of protection. Instead, we have discovered a military power unlike anything we have encountered in our travels. General Davis spoke up. Ambassador, we showed you a routine training exercise. That wasn't even close to the full extent of human military capability. The alien's large eyes widened slightly. We understand that. Our analysts have been studying human historical records. The conflicts you call world wars involved military forces larger than the entire population of most Confederation worlds. Dr. Martinez had been studying Silithian culture intensively since the military demonstration. Ambassador, could you help us understand how the Confederation typically handles first contact with new species? Forthek answered, his voice subdued. We have encountered 43 intelligent species in our region of space. 37 were peaceful herbivorous peoples like ourselves. 6 were aggressive predator species. What happened to the aggressive species? Colonel Santos asked. They destroyed themselves through internal conflict within a few centuries of developing space travel, Kethvar explained. Aggressive species lack the cooperation necessary for long-term civilization. They achieve basic technology, fight devastating wars, and collapse. Captain Rodriguez was beginning to understand the aliens' confusion. But humans are different. We're aggressive enough to wage large-scale warfare, but cooperative enough to build stable civilizations. Exactly, Kethavar confirmed. Your species combines traits we thought were mutually exclusive. You have the organizational capacity of peaceful civilizations with the military potential of warrior species. This should be impossible. President Garcia saw an opportunity to address the underlying concerns. Ambassador, I think we need to discuss something important. How does human military power actually work? Who controls it and why? Colonel Santos stepped forward. With your permission, Madam President, I'd like to explain something to the ambassador about military ethics and civilian control. He activated a display showing the structure of democratic governments and their relationship to military forces. Ambassador, human military power doesn't exist in a vacuum. It operates within frameworks of law, ethics, and civilian oversight. The display showed military academies where officers learned not just tactics and strategy, but also ethics, international law, and the history of warfare. It showed congressional oversight of military budgets, international treaties governing the conduct of war, and courts-martial for soldiers who violated military law. Our warriors are not berserkers, Santos explained. They are professionals who swear oaths to defend their nations and protect innocent people. They follow rules of engagement, respect the laws of war, and answer to civilian leadership. Marine Colonel Danny Phillips had joined the meeting at President Garcia's request. The 50-year-old veteran of multiple conflicts had been chosen specifically because of his reputation for ethical leadership and his ability to explain complex military concepts. Ambassador, Phillips said, may I ask what concerns you most about human military capability? Kethavar hesitated before answering. We fear that a species with such capacity for organized violence poses a threat to other civilizations. In our experience, aggressive species eventually turn their violence outward against their neighbors. That's a reasonable concern, Phillips acknowledged. But consider this. Humans have possessed nuclear weapons, devices capable of destroying entire cities, for over 80 years. We've used them twice, both times to end a devastating war more quickly. Since then, despite numerous conflicts, no nation has used nuclear weapons in warfare. The aliens looked confused. Why not? Forthek asked. If these weapons are so effective, why wouldn't aggressive species use them? Because we learned that some victories aren't worth the cost, Phillips replied. Human military ethics include concepts like proportionality, discrimination between combatants and civilians, and restraint in the use of force. Dr. Martinez added historical context. Ambassador, humans spent thousands of years learning how to control our capacity for violence. We developed international law, rules of warfare, and ethical frameworks specifically because we understood how destructive unrestricted conflict could be. General Davis brought up casualty statistics from recent conflicts. Our military operations in Iraq and Afghanistan involved hundreds of thousands of troops over many years. But we spent enormous resources trying to minimize civilian casualties and provide humanitarian aid. You wage war while simultaneously helping the people caught in the conflict? Kethavar asked, clearly struggling to understand the concept. Modern human military doctrine includes humanitarian operations as a core component, Phillips explained. We destroy enemy military forces while protecting civilian populations whenever possible. The conversation continued for hours, as the humans tried to help the aliens understand the complex relationship between human military power and human moral frameworks. They discussed military honor codes, international humanitarian law, and the concept of just war theory. Slowly, a new understanding began to emerge. The Zilithians started to see that human military capability existed within sophisticated systems of control and restraint. The same species that could wage devastating wars had also developed elaborate mechanisms for limiting and controlling that violence. The High Council wishes to propose new terms for our relationship, Kethavar finally announced. Not protection for a helpless species, but partnership between equals. The new agreement was fundamentally different from the original offer. Instead of Earth providing labor and resources in exchange for protection, the Confederation offered technology and scientific knowledge in exchange for human military expertise and strategic thinking. There are hostile species in this galaxy, Vorthek explained. Species that are both aggressive and organized enough to pose real threats. The Confederation has avoided them through isolation and defensive positioning. But that strategy has limits. You want human military advisors, General Davis realized. We want to learn how a peaceful civilization can maintain effective military forces, Kethavar confirmed. How to combine the capacity for warfare with the wisdom to avoid unnecessary conflicts. The negotiations took weeks, but eventually a mutual defense treaty was signed. The Zilithian Confederation would share their advanced technology with Earth, while humanity would provide military training and strategic expertise to help defend against truly hostile alien species. In the final ceremony, Sergeant Jake Martinez stood alongside Captain Rodriguez and the other military personnel who had participated in the cultural exchange. The aliens who had once seen them as ceremonial figures now regarded them with a mixture of respect and wariness. They still don't completely understand us, Rodriguez observed quietly. No, Martinez agreed, but at least now they understand that we're not helpless. And maybe they're starting to understand that being capable of violence doesn't make us evil. The treaty marked the beginning of a new era for both species. Humans would venture into a larger galaxy as partners rather than protected subjects. And the Zilithians would learn that sometimes the most peaceful civilizations are those with the strength to defend their peace. The aliens had thought humans were harmless until Marines explained war crimes. Now they were beginning to understand that human military